Welcome back to my tutorial, everyone. In this tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to hook enemies in Unity, and it will look something like this. So if this is something you're interested in seeing, then please stick with me and continue watching, and I'm going to show you step by step on how to implement this mechanism. Alright, so we're going to start off with a new project. I'm going to call this Hook Tutorial YouTube. I'm going to hit enter, and it will initialize the project here. Okay, we're ready. So I'm going to start off with the basic stuff. I'm going to make the ground here. So I'm going to create 3D object, cube. I'm going to call this ground. And then I'm going to make this 50 by 50 in both X and Z directions. So 50 by 50. So this looks good. I'm going to attach some material to it so you can see it better. So I'm going to do assets, create folder. I'm going to call this material, and I'm going to create a new material in here, and I'm going to call this green. So now I'm going to attach this green material to the ground, and of course it has no green color, so I'm going to make this green. Okay, that's much better. So that's our ground. Of course, I'm going to add a rigid body to it so it detects collisions, so we don't just slip through it. I'm going to make a rigid body. I'm going to not use gravity. I'm going to use is kinematic so it doesn't move. The collision detection is going to be continuous. As for the constraints, I'm going to make sure it doesn't move in any direction because we want the ground to be sturdy. So that's it for the ground. We're done with that. Next up, I'm going to make the player object. So I'm going to hit create 3D object capsule. I'm going to call this player, and I'm going to give it a tag of player, and I'm going to change the position of Y direction. I'm going to make it like this so it's flush on the ground. Then I'm going to make a rigid body, so add component, rigid body. I'm going to make sure to freeze rotation in the X and Z direction. We can still rotate in Y, but we can't rotate in X and Z. And as for the use gravity, I'm going to make this true. Collision detection is going to be continuous. And I'm going to make another material just to distinguish this. And I'm going to create a blue material. And of course, this is going to be blue. Like so. I'm going to drag this blue material into my player. If I hit play now, let's see what happens. As you can see, the player just stands there, so that's good. Next up, I'm going to make sure to attach the camera to the player. So I'm going to make the camera like this, just higher up, and move it closer to the player. Forward. So that's good. Then I'm going to rotate the camera so it faces like this, a little bit upward. Okay, that's much better. Then I'm going to attach the camera to the player, so now it's part of the player. Now if we move the player, the camera moves with us. So that's good so far. Next up, I'm gonna close up Steam because this is getting annoying. And okay, so player, and I'm gonna add a hook. So my hook in this case, just for the sake of the simplicity of this tutorial, is gonna be a sphere. So this could be anything really. This could be a sprite that you made, it could be a hook, 3D rendered kind of character, whatever you want it to be. So I'm gonna create an object. This is going to be a sphere, and this is going to be called hook. And I'm going to put the sphere a little bit more forward, like so. I'm going to make the sphere a little bit smaller, so 0.4, 0.4, 0.4, like that. And this is going to be like this, a little bit like this. Okay, this seems good so far. I'm going to make a material for the ball itself, so I'm going to create a material, and I'm going to call this pink. and go here and put it on the hook so we can see it better now. Okay, now that we have our hook, we're gonna attach a rigid body to it. So I'm gonna attach a rigid body, and I'm gonna disable gravity. We don't want it to fall, we want it to hook enemies, right? So we want it to be mid-air all the time. And I'm gonna enable is kinematic, so we don't want it to move at first. Collision detection is going to be continuous because we're gonna be colliding with enemies constantly as it's moving. And then let's test this out and see if nothing falls apart. That's gonna be good. And as you can see, everything's good so far, so that's good. Now I'm gonna start making the scripts. So I'm gonna go into my assets folder, create C# script. Actually, I forgot. Before we make a script, let me just delete this. Let me make a script folder. And call this scripts. Make a new script. Call this hook script. Then I'm gonna drag and drop my hook script into the hook object. So there's that. And I'm gonna start this in VS Code. You can use your favorite editor. I'm gonna delete all of these, and I'm gonna make some other variables later. But for now, I wanna make another script and call this constant script. So constant. I'm gonna open this as well. And the whole point of this is to store all the magic numbers in here. We don't want it to be in our script because if you have thousands of scripts or lines of code, it's going to be really tiresome to change all these variables. So why not store it somewhere global where you can control them, right? So we're going to be storing stuff like speed, distance, etc. I'm going to call this public static, so it's going to be a static class. I'm going to delete all of these. Right, so I'm gonna keep this empty for now. Okay, so for our hook script, we're gonna have a reference to the player. So private game object player. We want to have a reference to the enemy player. So private game object enemy. We're gonna have that later. We want to have a line renderer. So the purpose of the line renderer is to make it look like a hook when the ball is launched. So actually I'm gonna come here and add a component, line renderer, and for the line renderer I'm gonna come back here to the width and I'm gonna make this 0.3. And as for the material, under materials, I'm gonna click on this little circle here and I'm gonna make this sprites default. And then for the color here, I'm gonna make this, so I'm gonna click on this bottom left arrow right here, click this color. I'm gonna make this maybe blue in here. I'm gonna click on this other button and make this red, right? So that's the color so far. And then in my hook script, I'm gonna have a reference for this line renderer. So line renderer. I'm gonna have a couple of Boolean variables that will keep track whether we're hooking someone or someone was hooked. So I'm gonna have a Boolean is hooking and a Boolean was enemy hooked. And then I wanna have something called hook distance. So this calculates the hook distance we have right now currently. So float hook distance. And then in my constants file, I want to have a couple of variables initialized. So I want to have public const float hook speed. And this is going to be equal to 150.0f. So that's the hook speed we use throughout the game. We can change everything here. I'm gonna have a public const float, and I'm gonna call this max hook distance. And I'm gonna set this to 15f. right? So these are very useful. And now I want to store some offsets. So what do I mean by this? Well, when you come here, the hook itself is in relative position to the parent object, which is the player. So I want to store these offsets just to make sure everything's correct. As you can see here, that's the hook. Okay, that's good. Yeah, so I'm gonna put this as 0.854. So that's my X. So I'm gonna come back here. I'm gonna say public const float X offset. And I want to have the same thing for Z. That's what I have here. I'm gonna change this like so. And this is of course gonna be the Z offset. And don't forget the F here. Okay, so now that I have these offsets, we're gonna start programming everything here. So we're gonna say private void awake, and we're gonna have a private void update. And in awake, I want to initialize everything. So player is equal to game object dot find, and I'm gonna use the tag in here. You can use the name as well if you want to. And the player has a tag of player. So I'm gonna copy this. So now we have a reference to our player game object. The enemy we're gonna have a reference to later, as you will see. The line renderer is gonna be equal to get component, and we're using get component because it belongs to this hook script, and this hook script is attached to the hook itself, so it knows we're mentioned in this line renderer. So we're gonna say get component line renderer. Then we're gonna make is hooking equal to false. So is hooking equal to false. Then was enemy hooked is also gonna be false because we didn't hook anyone when the game starts, right? Then what else do we want to calculate? So the current hook distance is also going to be 0, right? So that's that. And for update, I'm gonna choose a button or a key to initiate the hooking process, and you can choose whatever you want. But for this tutorial, I'm gonna choose the left mouse button because that's the most intuitive one. So I'm gonna say if input dot get mouse button down 0. Then if that's the case, then start hooking. And I also want to make sure that we're not already hooking someone. So if you're in the process of hooking someone, you can't just press mouse and hook again. That would be too OP. So I'm gonna come here and say and we're gonna make sure we're not hooking anybody. And we also want to make sure that no enemy was hooked in the process. Because if you hook an enemy, then is hooking is still true, but the enemy was hooked. You don't want to hook another one. So we're gonna say if the enemy was not hooked and you did not hook anyone yet, then you can start hooking. I'm gonna come here and make a method called private void start hooking. And then in here, all I have to do is pretty much make start hooking equal to true. So start hooking, or sorry, is hooking is equal to true. So we're in the process of doing it. Then I want to add a force to the ball or the hook. So that's how we're gonna move it in this case. So I'm gonna make the isKinematic property equal to false. So right now the hook has a rigid body where isKinematic is equal to true. So I'm gonna make that equal to false. So I'm gonna say get component rigid body and dot isKinematic, whoops, dot isKinematic is equal to false. And then I'm gonna apply a force now. And actually, let's make another variable here called rigid body. So rigid body, I'm gonna call this RB, and it won't let me for some reason. Okay, so RB is equal to get component rigid body, and then I'm gonna say RB dot is kinematic equal to false, and we're gonna apply force to it. And what is the force in this case? Well, the force, we want the hook to go forward, you know, according to its own direction. So whatever the direction the hook is facing, it's gonna go in that direction. So we're gonna say transform dot forward. So this transform corresponds to the hook transform, and we're gonna make it face forward, and we're gonna times the hook speed itself. So hook speed, or constants actually, dot hook speed, like that. And let's try this out actually. Let's see how it plays out in editor. If we maximize this, and there you go. So it's releasing the ball, and of course we'll travel infinitely, and it's kind of slow right now. So I'm gonna make this 1500 for the speed. Let's see how it goes now. And there you go. That's the speed that I want for this tutorial. That could be anything for you if you want to. So that's my speed. That's the start hooking process. And of course, using the hook distance, we want to see if it traveled far enough, and if it did, we want it to bring back to us. So I'm going to write another method here. I'm going to call this private void return hook. Okay. So this return hook is gonna check if we're in the process of hooking. If not, then there's no point of, you know, executing this method. So if is hooking, so if this is true, we're gonna calculate the original position of the ball and calculate the distance from that. So we're gonna get the original position of the hook, the current position of the hook, and if the distance is greater than max distance, then in that case, we simply return the hook. So to get the original position, I'm just gonna come back here. So float original position is, I'm gonna make it here. Then float original position is equal to whatever position my ball is currently in. So I'm not gonna confine this to just awake, so I'm gonna make this transform dot position, like that. And sorry, this is not going to be a float, it's going to be a vector 3 obviously. So that's original position, and then original position is also going to be here in transform dot position. So I'm just going to say if I'm going to calculate the hooking distance as well. So I'm going to say hook distance is equal to vector 3 dot distance. This is a built-in method in Unity. And I'm going to calculate the distance between transform dot position, so the current position, and the what was it called? The original position. Like so. Right? So this is our hook distance, and I'm gonna say if hook distance is greater than constants dot max hook distance. If that's the case, then we want to return the hook to the player. So we're gonna say we're gonna make it, you know, we're gonna make the kinematic equal to true, and we're gonna reset the position. So we're gonna say rb.isKinematic equal to true, and we're gonna say transform dot position is equal to original position. And of course we're gonna set the is hooking to false. So we're gonna reset this, right? And in here I'm just gonna come back and say return hook, and let's see how this works out. And if I do this, and of course this will fail because I just realized I used the original position as the transform of the position itself. What I really wanted was the transform of the position of the hook relative to the player. So this current position right here, right? So when that's the case, let's see what happens. So this is going to be actually equal to new vector, right? And it's going to have player dot transform dot position, or sorry, it's gonna, yeah, so it's gonna have transform dot position dot x, or player, sorry, so again, player dot transform dot position dot x plus constant dot x offset, and it's gonna have player dot transform dot position dot y, player dot transform dot position dot z plus constants dot z offset. So this makes more sense, right? We're always comparing it to the player position, and same thing here. So it's updating every time. And now it should actually compare to this position right here, which is relative to our player. So if I hit play, and as you can see, every time we shoot the ball and it passes a certain distance, it will come back to us. And that's exactly what we want. So now the next step is to add the line renderer to it, right? So to add the line renderer, I'm gonna say line renderer dot set position 0, and with this one I'm gonna have my original position, so original position, and line renderer dot set position, and in my second position I'm gonna get the transform dot position, right? And if I play this now, look what happens. Pretty cool, huh? And I can make the line renderer obviously smaller, so I'm gonna come back here. I'm gonna make this 0.2. Okay, and let's see. Let's see if this one, how this one looks. Nice. So this is what our hook looked like so far. And now it's time to add the enemy and make it interact with it. So in this case, I'm not gonna make this too pointy. I'm gonna make this like this. Okay, that makes sense. And I'm gonna create 3D object. I'm gonna make a cube. And with this cube, I'm gonna position it up here. And I'm gonna call this enemy. And I'm gonna tag it as enemy as well. So I'm gonna do this, enemy. Then I'm gonna come back here, change the tag to enemy. Then I'm gonna make this a trigger, so it's a trigger for our hook. You can do whatever you want with it now. And for the X scale, I'm gonna make this 5. And for the Y scale, I'm also gonna make this 5. And now, as you can see here, we're gonna hook this object right here. So as soon as the ball touches the object, we're gonna bring it towards us, right? So that's our enemy. I'm gonna go back to my script. I'm gonna make a new method, or not a new method, a onTrigger enter. So I'm gonna call here, so void onTrigger enter. And it's gonna take a collider as a parameter. And here, I'm just gonna check if the collider dot game object dot tag dot equals, and if it's equal to enemy, then that means we've hit an enemy. And I'm just gonna test this out for now. So debug.log. So let's test this out. Let's see what happens. And as you can see, it prints to the console. So that means it is working, it is detecting the enemy. So that's good. So now all we have to do is set the was enemy hooked to true. And then remember our enemy game object here. I'm gonna set this to collider.gameObject. And that's it. So whatever game object we collided with, the enemy is gonna be that game object. And for this mechanic to hook it towards us, I'm gonna make another method. I'm gonna call this bring enemy towards player. Okay. And obviously this is gonna be a void. So private void, bring enemy towards player. And of course we're gonna check if was enemy hooked. So we're gonna check if this condition was true. And if that's the case, we wanna bring the enemy towards us. So the function I'm gonna use for that in Unity is something called vector.moveTowards or vector3.moveTowards. And I'm gonna show you how it works. So I'm gonna calculate the final position. And from this final position, it's going to be equal to, well, where do we want the final position to be? We want the final position to be in front of this ball right here, right? So we want pretty much to be in front of the original position. So we want new vector3 original position dot x original position dot y. And as for the y value, actually, we don't need to change it. We're just going to make it the enemy's y position, right? So we're going to say enemy.transform.position.y. So we're going to keep it the same. The only thing we're going to change is the x value itself. And as for the z position, it's going to be equal to the original position.z plus constants.z offset. So I want to explain this final position. What this is saying is we want the final position to be at the original position, but we want this to keep its current y value. So we don't want it to go below ground or above ground, right? So we keep it as enemy.transform.position.y, so we keep that intact. And the z position, the same z as this one, but slightly in front of it. So that's why we said original position.z plus constants.z offset. So that's the final position we want it to end up in. And of course, we're just going to say here the position of the enemy. So enemy.transform.position is equal to vector3.moveTowards. And this is going to move from a original position. So it's going to move from enemy.transform.position, and it's going to move towards the final position. And as for the max distance, we're going to use the constants dot max hook distance, right? And after the enemy was hooked and after we brought it to the player, we're going to say was enemy hooked equals false. So we're going to reset this. And of course, I'm going to call this right here, right? So let's test this out. Let's see what happens. So if I click play, and as you can see, we ended up right where we want. Now, I can actually increase this. So let's see. I'm gonna make something called public const float. Let's say enemy z offset. And this is going to be equal to, let's make it 2 actually, 2.0f, right? So let's use this instead and see what happens. So let's test this out. So there was a glitch there. So as soon as we collided, it returned the hook, but for some reason it kept getting stuck there. So let's see what's going on here. So we hooked the enemy, so this was true, so was enemy hooked equals true. Then, as we were returning the hook, we brought the enemy player towards us. So this is what happened. So in here, we're saying if hook distance is greater than constants.max hook distance. But you see, this enemy right here is closer than the max hook distance. So this will never be true. So instead, I want to check also if an enemy was hooked. So was enemy hooked, right? So if an enemy was hooked or we went too far, then bring it back. So this should work. Let's test this out. And if I shoot this, and as you can see, this is way smoother now. So now I want to test this out while the player is moving. So I'm going to make a method that moves our player, right? So I'm going to say private void move player, and I'm going to have if, I'm going to use WASD just to keep it simple. So if input dot get key. So the difference is between get key and get key down is that get key will only work if you're holding that key. So we want to hold W, A, or S, or D. So if the key is W in this case, then we want to move forward. So I'm going to say player dot transform dot translate, and we're going to translate forward. So player dot transform dot forward. I'm gonna comment this out, or not comment this out, and I'm gonna say if input dot get key down, or get key, is equal to key code dot D. So this will go to the right. So I'm gonna say player dot transform dot translate and player dot transform dot right, and I'm gonna copy these two actually, and now I'm gonna make this A, and A is gonna, or sorry, S is just gonna be the reverse of the forward, so we're gonna go backwards, and then A is gonna be reverse of right, so we're gonna go left. And we're gonna take this move player method, and I'm gonna go in update and check if we hooked someone or we're in the process of hooking. So if we are, then we don't want to be moving, right? So we only want to hook or move, but you can't do both at the same time. Otherwise, you're gonna be overpowered. But it's up to you, really. So I'm gonna say if not is hooking and not was enemy hooked, then we can move the player, right? So if these two conditions are true, then and only then we can move. So I'm gonna go back here and test this out, and as you can see, we can move, and when we hook, we can hook as much as we want. And I fell down. Let's make the ground actually. Let's make this 1000 by 1000, so it's much bigger. Okay, this is much better. All right. So as you can see, that's pretty much it. You can hook players like this. You can hook them towards you, right? So that's the hook mechanism in a nutshell. I hope this video helped you out, guys. If you found this helpful, or if you want another tutorial, maybe there's something in Unity that interests you. What interests you the most in Unity? And just let me know in the comments. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and please subscribe to see more tutorials like this. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.